if your goal is to, I just like to get paid to show up, then the chamber, that's where I would start. So that's why I said, if you said, I want you to get started in paid speaking. I will say, as a side note, for those that are listening that want to get into live speaking and paid to speak, the best market to go after is associations. So I said the chamber is the example of where I would go first because that's the low-hanging fruit. But when I say associations, I mean the most common place you're going to get paid to speak are corporate, nonprofit, associations, and education. I need to go into a place and feel like you can do stuff with what I taught you without paying a penny that can change your career in life. That has to happen for me to feel like I delivered. So I'm not one of those people who go in, and I guess this is the first major takeaway is, don't go into it thinking I can't give the good stuff away because then they would hire me. You need to go in thinking, I'm going to give everything away. And the truth is, they're going to say, if he can teach me that much, I need to learn more. And so I learned something that first time ever, which is that you'll watch a captivating, passionate speaker share a message, even if it's not great, many times quicker than somebody who's brilliant, who's really boring.
If you want to build a legitimate, profitable online business without shiny objects, without the hypey gimmicks, and without the stress and overwhelm, if you want to make more money without having to be present online all day, every day, pumping out content that nobody sees and hustling DMs to generate leads and sales, then this is the place for you. Welcome to the Digital Trailblazer Podcast, your online business university, where you'll learn how ordinary people start from ground zero with no influence, no email list or audience to sell to, and no business or marketing experience, and go from working 9-to-5 jobs to building successful 6- and 7-figure online businesses and all the steps in between. Learn the strategies that worked and what didn't. Learn the mistakes that they made and how to avoid them, and then learn their plans for scaling their businesses and taking things to the next level. All so that you can build your business faster and easier and make more money without sacrificing the things that are important to you in your life. I'm your host, Leah Ray Getz, and with me is my husband, Todd. Now, let's get to it with today's guest. Welcome, Digital Trailblazers. With us today is Corey Poirier. Corey, go ahead and introduce yourself to our audience. Let them know what you're all about.
So I'm, as we discussed off air, I'm a Canadian, Atlantic Canadian, as we call it, in the eastern part of the country. I am a speaker now for 20 some years. I've spoken on 5 TedX stages at events at places like Harvard and Columbia and Oxford. Author as well. I say all these things to also say it wasn't always this way, but that's what it looks like today. I spend a lot of my time both trying to impact people in a positive way with my own message, and then at the same time, hoping to help other people get their message out to the world. When I first started, I said I was like the surfer, that I was on the surfboard saying, look at me, I'm doing stuff. And now I'm trying to create the waves for a whole bunch of other surfers. So that's what life looks like today. But I did grow up in a small town, raised by a single mother, barely graduated high school, got a 49+1 when I needed a 50. Didn't know the difference between fiction and nonfiction. I told a girl that on a first date. I never got a second date. And then I also didn't read my first book until age 27. So that's my backstory. My origin story, as they say in the Marvel. But today, what I said is kind of what it looks like today.
Okay, well, how did you transition into speaking?
Well, first and foremost, I wasn't comfortable with speaking. I mean, I talked to a lot of speakers that say I was just, as a kid, I just knew. I was already born comfortable on stage. I was the exact opposite. As a kid, I just knew I would never speak for a living or in front of people, ever. And I had a newspaper when I was 19, which was a small business entrepreneurial newspaper. I kind of describe it like a newspaper version of Success Magazine. And I would go around interviewing people, trying to learn their stories. And then what happened was, along the way somewhere there, a group said, will you come and speak on the difficulties young entrepreneurs face? And so I didn't even see it as public speaking at the time. I don't know where my head was at. I think I was just excited to go into a place and actually be invited to talk to the business world at such a young age. And I went in and did this talk that I don't remember to this day. I was told by people I turned about 17 shades of color. But when I asked them what I spoke about, they said, I have no idea what you were saying up there, but you were so excited that you sold me. And so I learned something that first time ever, which is that you'll watch a captivating, passionate speaker share a message, even if it's not great, many times quicker than somebody who's brilliant, who's really boring. So that was a big lesson in speaking, but that was the only talk I delivered for a lot of years. And then fast forward till 2022, And I say I got tricked, but basically I ended up performing stand-up comedy. So I say I got tricked into performing stand-up comedy. And how do you get tricked? Well, we went to a workshop. We were supposed to fill the room with people, and then we were going to talk about what the comics did that night. And the guy hosting it told us about 5 minutes of showtime. No, you guys are the entertainers. I didn't tell you. So we had no material. 8 people walked out the front door. I've never seen them ever again. I went into the bathroom. I jokingly say now, but there was some truth, to try to find an exit window. I couldn't find an exit window. I came back out, and I ended up performing that night. Interestingly, he didn't tell us how to adjust the mic stand. And he didn't tell us how to turn the mic on. So I actually told my first 2 jokes to dead silence, only to discover later it's because I didn't know how to turn the mic on. And we got the mic turned on. I told them again. I bombed again. I've now since said that I think I'm the only comic in history to bomb with the same material twice in 10 minutes. And anyway, I went to the office the next day. People said, "Did you meet someone? Because you seem to have a different energy about you." And that was a hint, I guess, to the fact that it was maybe a passion. So I kept going back week after week to the comedy club, bombing every week. I think at this point, it took me a year and a half to get a hearty laugh, one laugh. But I kept going back. And then eventually somebody invited me to a Tony Robbins event. And I went to watch him, and they said, "Can you believe he's getting paid to do this?" And it was like one of those record scratch moments. Like I was like, what? Like I'm going to a comedy club, driving 8 comics, getting $10 at the door, paying $5 in gas to get there. And there's somebody that's getting paid to speak during the day with no alcohol involved and no hecklers, and you get where I'm going. And so I was like, ooh, I want to know more about that. I'm already doing worse than that now. And so I went and sold the local community college on why I should teach a sales course. I jokingly also say now it's funny that it took me a year to sell them on why I should teach a sales course. So it can't be very good at sales if it took me a year. But it was because they had never done anything like that before. It was like history making. And I ended up teaching that course. And that's what evolved into me getting in speaking. Like that whole journey I shared, what happened was people that couldn't send their staff because they had too many staff and couldn't shut down the office asked the college, "Can we bring him in?" And the college said, "We don't care. Work it out with him on your own." So they sent them to me. And I knew that company was going to pay $300 a person, and they were going to send people. So I was like, they were going to spend $15,000. If I charge $1,000, I'm going to be the hero. Now I was smart enough to know I couldn't charge $5,000 because I would be figured out. Like I wasn't at that level, and I would have just got burned. People would have talked, and I never would have hired again. So having said all that, what happened was I did that talk, the first one that I got gifted like that, did a second talk like that. And then that's kind of how my career started. I kept teaching at the college for 5 years while I was also getting one-offs of speaking at events. And that's kind of, I could say the rest is history, but that's kind of how it started. And that's like 3,000 talks ago.
Yeah, I'm curious with that many talks, as someone who's not like, I've spoken on stage several times, but it's not a mainstay for me. Doing it that many times, like what is your typical talk about? Like, do you have themes? Do you have like a specific, topic that you're covering, or is it very diverse?
So I think it's less diverse than I sometimes thought it was. So it's the 3 main things I spoke on, because sometimes somebody would say, "Hey, can you come and speak at our leadership conference on leadership?" Well, yes, I can, but it's not what I was kind of pitching. Also, I can obviously go in and share my story, which some organizations are like, "We want you to share a motivational message about what's possible." So I might go in and talk about being born in a really small town where I was told you could never achieve anything, and then what happens after that. And so those are talks that I might go in and speak on. But the 3 talks that I quote unquote pitched throughout the years, one was a customer service talk. One of the things I learned, which took me a while, is that if you want to get booked more often, you have to have a unique take on a talk. So you can't, if I go speak on customer service and they can choose from 50 speakers, I better be next level good to even get considered. So what I realized is if you want to get considered against the next level people, you have to do something that's different. And so what I did was I came in and spoke about a talk called Getting Standing Ovations from Every Customer. So this is where I pulled from my comedy background and also music. I used to play music in clubs. And so what I did was I created this talk that would basically focus on what you can do to get a standing ovation if you're the Rolling Stones, that you can also do if you're at a Staples big box store selling, that you can also do. So it was like, what are the 5 things I noticed that the Rolling Stones do, the restaurants do that get a lot of customers, Starbucks does, Disney, Apple, that you can bring over into your company, or even if you're a financial service provider or a real estate agent, you can bring into your career. So the unique take on it was me mixing the entertainment world and the business world. And I had that background. The second talk is reading and adjusting to personality types. And so that's simply that they pretty much, ultimately figure there's 4 personality types when you're in business that you're going to run across. There's a training called Myers-Briggs where they talk about like the 12 different types, but the 4 types is more common. And I won't go into all the details, but basically it's just you might have a high energy social person and you might have a person that's very quiet and focuses on what's in it for them. And so if you know what the 4 personality types are and you can adjust in sales, you're going to have a more successful sales career. So my unique take on it was because the only people that were doing personality types were doing it for other reasons, like hiring or relationships. So I took the focus of sales. So I would go talk to realtors or insurance agents about how, if you're sitting, like, let's say real estate and you're doing an open house and you're sitting across from a husband and a wife and they both have different personalities, how can you adjust back and forth with the two of them so that both say, I love that guy and I don't know why. So that was the second. And then the third talk, which again was unique, and it was probably the most unique out of the 3 because I was the only people that could deliver it, is a talk I call The Timeless Secrets of Influential Leaders. And how that's unique to me is I've done now over 7,500 interviews with thought leaders and influencers. And I don't know any other speakers personally that have done that many interviews one-on-one with the Deepak Chopra's, Tommy Chong's, Lisa Nichols' of the world. And so what I could do is come in and talk about what are the 5, and usually I shared 5 or 3, but what are the 5 things they have in common, but also they do differently than everybody else that has allowed them to get to the top 1% of their field. So for listeners that have heard of Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, it will be similar to what he taught in Think and Grow Rich. He taught 13 lessons to success, and it's what he discovered after all these interviews. Well, mine are timeless secrets because I realized that it's the same thing that people were doing in 1930 as today, just in a different way. Like, for example, today, it might be technology. Like you might have to say no to your devices to avoid the distractions and time block. Well, back then it wasn't a phone. It might be the newspaper, or it might be employees or what have you. But these are things that the way you do them might change, but the fundamentals never change. That's why they're kind of secrets. So that talk was really unique because I didn't know anybody else who could actually truly come in and say, look, this isn't just me saying, because a lot of speakers will go, I'll tell you the 5 things you need to do in customer service, but it's literally just their beliefs. This one here is that out of the 3 talks is founded in actual fact. Like when you've done 7,500 interviews, you can legit say, here's what 95% of them do really well. So that's what that talk was. So those are my 3 kind of go-to talks.
A lot of folks, coaches, course creators, they're obviously doing online stuff, and that's our jam. We help them with everything, how to do that. But there is a massive opportunity to get in front of more people physically, like to actually get on stage and talk to people. And I think there's a lot of folks that I interact with who are building online businesses, but aspire to get on stage. They aspire to be able to be a paid speaker or even just to use that as a lead gen source for their business. So how does one go about doing that?
So, I mean, it's a big question because first and foremost, I always say, I think it's Stephen Covey who said, begin with the end in mind. And I always say you have to figure out what your goal is before you take action. So even though, and I'll answer the question directly, but even though it's not about books, I look at the example of books. People will always say to me, well, should I self-publish or should I go with a publisher? And I always say it's not as simple as yes or no, or go with a publisher or don't. The question I have back for you is, what is your end goal? And the deeper you get into that conversation, I can tell them fairly easily and quickly whether or not they should be with a self-publisher or a publisher. Now, I'll bring it down to the simplest forms. In that world, if you need distribution, meaning if you're writing a book that you know needs to be in millions of people's hands and you need distribution, that's going to be very hard to do with a self-published book. But if you don't and you might not need distribution if you're in a niche field. Like if you're offering a book on how to get paid to speak, we have that book. But if you're offering that book, you don't need to be with a traditional publisher. Like you're looking for a niche market. You want flexibility. You want to be able to put the words you want in there and not have them edit it like crazy. There's a whole bunch of reasons that book, a niche book like that, or a how-to book fits really well with self-published. But it still comes back to what's your goal. And so I would say the same thing with speaking. So the reason I said there's a big answer to that is, are you wanting to get paid to speak? Which is one thing. And now when I say get paid to speak, I mean get paid to show up. I don't mean sell it from the stage. The secondary question could be, do you want to sell from the stage? So that's a second. A third, so I could keep going down this path, but a third one is what you said, generate leads as a speaker. And so the approach you take is going to be different depending on what your goal is as far as those areas. Having said that, to find bookings, it's fundamentally the same. So it's just what'll be different is how you approach it. So if you're wanting to get paid to speak, then and that's your ultimate goal, then even from day one, you get rid of the word free. So you can't say I'll speak for free, or I'm a free speaker, or come and see my free talk. You have to start saying no fee, because what you're trying to do is position yourself with a certain level of value. So if I were to call a chamber and say, hey, and let's say I haven't spoke before, you drop me down in the middle of nowhere and said, you need to start getting paid to speak tomorrow. The first thing I would do, pick up the phone and call a chamber or something similar where they have multiple members who are all business owners. And then I would say, hey, I normally charge, but I'm willing to come in for no fee and do a talk for you. And all I would ask in return is to hand out my evaluation form and to be able to film the video of me speaking and stuff like that. The evaluation form is what's going to get me paid, because I'm going to get in front of 100 people, hopefully deliver a killer talk. And on the form, they're going to write, it's going to be a question, do you know of others who could hire me for a similar talk to the one I delivered today? If so, can we follow up? And so if it's them, they're just going to go, yeah, me. And if it's somebody else, they'll put somebody else. And now I leave there with 30 leads. So if I want to get paid to speak, every aspect of that is about, I want to get in front of an audience that's going to pay me, use the terminology of I normally get paid, but if I'm going to do, let's say, summits, I'll just use the example as a lead generation, because then it could be, here's the bigger question too. Do I want to do this stuff in person or online? So if I want to generate leads, I would say online is probably an easier path if you perform well online, because then you don't have to fly to go get the leads, because you're not getting paid until you convert those leads. You can reach as many people online now doing a summit. So let's say that's the example. Well, what I would do in that case is I would make it clear to I always feel that you need to chat with the summit leader, like whoever's booking it, and tell your goals so they can actually position you best for the summit. So let's just say, as an example, if we use, I want to generate leads from a summit. So what I would do then is I would look at the summit and look at the different topics. I would figure out, again, going back to my other point, what can I talk about that's unique? But here's the other part. What can I talk about that's going to lead into whatever I'm trying to convert to? So I'll give you a real world example. Something I would do every day of the week, and maybe I shouldn't say this sometimes because people will be pitching me now on this, but if somebody had a summit that they had 1,000 people attending, like 1,000 people watching us right now in a summit, and they could guarantee me that 1,000 is going to be there, and let's say that people in the room are paid speakers, but it's virtual, then I would, every day of the week, the talk I would pick there is how to land your next TedX talk. And the reason you say that is because let's say they're charging me $5,000 to do that. Now I'm saying now in a perfect world, I'm going to say most people should do this for free, meaning like you shouldn't be charged to do it. But I'm saying in that case, that's such a good fit. I would pay $5,000 because my TEDx program, let's say the highest end one is 5,000. So all I have to do is convert one person out of 1,000 paid speakers to do a TED Talk, which we know 80% of who have done it want to do a TED Talk. So what I'm saying is that's a perfect fit, because I'll go in and I'll teach people how to land a TED Talk, and I'll tell them as much as I can in 45 minutes. But I can tell you this, I'll never get enough shared in 45 minutes for them to feel they can do it on their own. Now, some will, and we do have people that go and do it on their own. But truthfully, most of them are going to say, I need more, or I don't want to put in the time, or I'm willing to pay the money and not have to put in the time to have Corey help me do it instead. So what I'm getting at is I do give, like when I said teach, I need to go into a place and feel like you can do stuff with what I taught you without paying a penny that can change your career in life. That has to happen for me to feel like I delivered. So I'm not one of those people who go in, and I guess this is the first major takeaway is, don't go into it thinking I can't give the good stuff away because then they would hire me. You need to go in thinking, I'm going to give everything away. And the truth is, they're going to say, if he can teach me that much, I need to learn more. Brendan Burchard, I'm sure many people listening who know who Brendan is, I feel that how Brendan grew so quick, like, 10 million, I think it's 10 million people they say he's impacted. He hit Tony Robbins' numbers in about 2 years. And how did he do that? I believe it's because Brendan went in and said, here's my whole system. Here's everything. He'd do 45-minute, everything you need to know, and say, now, if you want to reach out to our team to learn more, reach out. And that's how he converted. Yes, there's people that took it and did it on their own. Who cares? Then you value for them. So I'm going right into the weeds, but I'm saying basically the takeaway from that is figure out what you're going to be able to share that's going to be relevant to that audience. Figure out how that's going to lead into something on the back end if your goal is to convert leads. It doesn't have to be sell too. It could be at the end, I could say, okay, I taught you about how to, first of all, find the organizer for a TedX and reach out. Now, since I didn't have enough time to cover this, go grab my 5 tips for how to crush it once you're on the stage. And that lead generation. So now I'm with an audience that likes my message. I over-deliver and overshare. And I say, here's how to grab my lead magnet. And then ultimate situation, if I had 1,000 people, realistic numbers, maybe 100 and some, whatever that 160, let's say, sign up for that free lead generation. And then if we go further down the pipeline, then it could be a scenario where they sign up and then it sends them an email and says, hey, thanks for grabbing this. After you've looked at all this, if you feel you're ready for the stage and you might be a good candidate to work with us, schedule a call at let's just say speakontedx.com. Let's say that was our link, and then that converts to our calendar, and now we have a sales team on the back end. So that's a full funnel just for going to speak at one summit. So I hope that's what you're looking for as far as how, but that's kind of one example of one summit. That's a very basic summit, obviously.
Yeah. No, and I think that's helpful. I think a lot of people, we've been digital trailblazers and tons of summits and done a lot of speaking. And I think there's probably audience members who've heard of summits. They get that they might want to do one, but they don't actually understand how that follows through. So I think that's a helpful conversation for them. Is the chamber or like something like the chamber a good place to get started just across the board? Like if you're wanting to do physical speaking?
It depends. Okay, so I'm sorry too, because it'd be great for me just to say yes or no, but I'm not that person. I think I need, I always say it depends. So it's similar to maybe, but I think it's always important to give context, because I know for myself when I'm listening something, somebody says something, if I said yes, chamber's a good place, everybody goes to chamber, and then they said this didn't work for me, and the reason could be is, again, I'll go back to your goals. So if your goal is to sell from a stage, or if your goal is to convert leads, depending on the business you're in, I would say the chamber is the wrong place to start. And that includes, again, if your goal is to sell from a live stage. So even if your goal is to speak live, the reason the chamber is good for the approach I mentioned, which is getting paid to speak right away, is because typically speaking, the people in that room are brick and mortar businesses that typically have conferences, so they might hire a speaker to come in and speak to their staff or their members. Whereas you're wanting to sell from a stage, you probably want to be at like a learning annex or a real estate conference or a social media or a podcast conference, because those might be your people, but you're trying to convert one-to-one, like end user. Whereas if you want to get, and that's still speaking on a live stage. So I'll go back and say, if your goal is to, I just like to get paid to show up, then the chamber, that's where I would start. So that's why I said, if you said, I want you to get started in paid speaking. I will say, as a side note, for those that are listening that want to get into live speaking and paid to speak, the best market to go after is associations. So I said the chamber is the example of where I would go first, because that's the low-hanging fruit. But when I say associations, I mean the most common place you're going to get paid to speak are corporate, nonprofit, associations, and education. The reason I say associations is you got to look at the tree. How are you going to grow the tree quickly? So if you go do that talk I mentioned for an association and hand it that evaluation form, if you pick an association, let's say it's a real estate association, you could have 50 brokers in the room, meaning 50 owner-operator realtors who hire speakers to come in and speak at their event. If you go to a home builders conference, you might have all the construction and home builders who have 300 or 400 employees at the event. So what I'm getting at is associations, not only do you get the talk that you just booked, but you have a room full of potential people who can hire you. But now let me flip that. What if you went and did a corporate talk for Subway restaurants? Do you think there's going to be many people in the room of the Subway employees that are going to be able to pay you 10 grand to go speak in their living room? Probably not. So associations was my money place. Like, it was like, out of the 4 of those, education's great as well. They'll refer you usually to other education. But associations is the best of the best because it's the right people in the room. And again, that even comes down to picking the right associations, because certain ones will have members in the room that are just one-person shows, the whole thing. Like if you went into Knitting Association of America, probably is not going to have a whole lot of corporate, companies in the audience that can hire you. But like I said, if you go do a home builders one and it's a major home builders association, chances are there's a lot of smaller home builders that are still big enough to hire you to speak. So again, if you want to get paid to speak, I would say associations, and I would start with things like chambers. But if you want to sell from the stage, I would go after markets like, I'm talking out loud, but let's say, again, podcasting conferences, lifestyle conferences, wellness conferences, social podcasting, like I said, in social media. And these are ones where it's individual attendees in the room. So like, for example, the Podcast Association, what's it called? Podcast Movement. There's about 2,000 people go there. Well, they're almost all podcasters. So if you were trying to convert, whether selling from the stage, maybe you have a podcasting course that generates money, or let's say you were selling your services of producing podcasts, that's your audience. So I would start there because I would say, okay, those are my 2,000 people that can hire me, and they're the perfect audience for what I'm doing. Now, if you were doing that same thing and you went to a chamber, that wouldn't be your audience because none of the room probably want to, well, maybe 5 want to run a podcast out of 200 in the room. So I hope that answered the question, but I hate that. I feel bad that in a context, it always has to go back to that one path you're taking. But hopefully I outlined 2 paths there. If you want to sell from the stage, but still live stages, then go to events that have a lot of individual attendees in the room. If you want to get paid to speak, I say go to places where there's bigger companies represented in the room that are separate companies. By the way, there's a whole bunch of other benefits to that scenario, i.e., not only when you go into the room of an association, do you have maybe 30 people that say, we should reach out to you about our event, but also each one of those testimonials, because I asked for endorsement or testimonials, and I say, can we use this in our marketing? If I did my first talk ever at a chamber, and there's 100 businesses in the room, and 80 fill out my form, and 70 say I could use their testimonial, that means that I have 70 company names from my first talk. So my website, I could have 70 testimonials. If you're doing corporate, that'll take you 70 events to get that many testimonials. So it's also, there's a lot of shortcuts in that approach of going to the chamber first.
Oh, that's smart. I like it. So in your intro, you talked a bit about getting onto some pretty prestigious stages, Harvard and some different things. So I'm curious, so how did you get those doors opened to have those opportunities? Well, how did that all come about?
So this one's kind of I guess it's a tough one because it's not as sexy as you think. So it depends on the venue, but like, for example, I've spoken to Microsoft multiple times. That door was opened by, I spoke at an event, and a guy was in the room that ran his own nonprofit, and little known to me, he also was I forget the title now, but Microsoft training coordinator. So he ran their virtual events with 1,600 team leaders, and it was virtual, so I didn't even have to leave my home. And I did multiple talks for them that way. So the door opened because he saw me speak at another event. Usually it's see me speak or word of mouth. The number one reason that people hire speakers is they've seen them live. Number 2 is they've watched a video. Number 3 is somebody else referred them. So more often than not, it's usually the first and the third. And then if I'm referred, then they want to see a video anyway to consider me. But to answer the question about the Harvards and the Columbias and the Oxfords, the reason that's not as sexy of an answer is because we run a company, as I mentioned off the top, called Blue Talks, and we actually run our live events at those venues. So how you could do it is reach out to me, and then if you ended up speaking on one of our stages, that's where we run our stages. You'll notice, by the way, it's very specific. Words matter to me, and integrity matters. So if you go back and listen to the beginning of the episode, I said, and spoken at events at. I didn't say spoke at Harvard. I spoke at events at Harvard. It's subtle, but it's important to me because Harvard didn't invite me in. And the truth is, Harvard mostly doesn't invite anybody in. It's usually professors or a doctor traveling through. So when people say they spoke at Harvard, 99% of the time it was at an event that took place at Harvard. And so we run our Blue Talks events, similar to TedX. We run our Blue Talks events at those type of venues. So how you can speak at those venues is through us. The cool part about that is it kind of validates what we're talking about, because think of the positioning of me saying I spoke at those events whenever that's the thing you went to say, how did you do that?
Mm-hmm. Right.
So I tell our clients, like I said, do not say Harvard hired you to speak. You say I spoke at an event at Harvard. But my point of that is it still sounds just as prestigious. You didn't come back to me and say, you said you spoke at an event at Harvard. So does that mean you didn't say that, right? People don't. But to me, then you're living in integrity, and at the same time, the credibility doesn't drop any way. But how we did it is I literally wanted to speak at those places. I was told I would never amount to anything by my vice principal at high school and stuff like that. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to go make my own magic happen. So we did the research, we figured out how to do it, and now we run events at those places. And honestly, the people that work with us, that's great leverage on their bio to say I've spoken on site at MIT and at Columbia. So that's kind of that side. But if I go to a lot of the other prestigious places I've spoken, including the TEDx's, like TEDx, I run my events myself. I got invited. Most of the other ones are either word of mouth or seen a video or seen me speak, or the last one is pitched myself. Rolling up my sleeves and pitching myself has happened too. Now I have a lot of people that come to us and ask us how to help them, like how they could land a TEDx and what that looks like. And interestingly, the last one I pitched, they said, well, we'll hire her, but we want you to speak too. So that one was like I was invited because I was pitching her. But she got booked and never even met them before. She never filled out an application, nothing. So I won't say the name because that's not normal. But the point is, if you know the organizer, that's how much easier life gets. And so all these places, it's either ultimately you pitch yourself, you get invited, or you find a unique way to find out the organizer and get involved. One of those aspects.
That's awesome. So we talk a lot about getting on stage, which is really important. But now, what do you say? Like, how do you actually put together? I think a lot of people have expertise, but maybe they haven't formulated a talk, right? Where they really put together a structured talk, whether that the end goal was just to be awesome and to get more paid speaking gigs, or the end goal is to generate leads or whatnot. Can you walk us through what should we consider or think about, or really how to put together the talk itself?
So, I'll give you what I'll call the easy answer, although nothing's ever easy. I'll give you the easiest answer is I use two things in developing my talks. I'll call them methodologies, if you want to call them that. I don't even know if they're that deep, but one is called the spider method and one is called the DIP method, DIP method. The spider method I learned in my stand-up comedy days. We had a comic come down. He did a clinic for us. And he showed us this, I think he called it the spider mapping method, or I don't know, something like that. But really what it is, it's a mind mapping exercise. And I learned in comedy, but then years later, I'm like, why can't we use this as a speaker? So the idea behind it was using this spider method to create your comedy. So for example, as a comic, let's say if I wanted to talk about pets. So I would draw the body of the spider, which is the biggest part, the circle. And in there, I put pets because that's what my bit's going to be about. And then I might write, if I drew 3 legs, because I believe in the rule of 3. So I drew 3 legs. One leg could be goldfish. Next leg could be dogs. Next leg could be cats. And then from that leg, I'll draw another one and I'll say, okay, what's a funny observation about goldfish? And you probably see where I'm going. I'm building it. I'm just putting it on paper so it becomes a structure. And so that's the same structure I get people to use with speaking. So for example, the circle in the middle could be customer service, because that's what I'm going to speak on. And the first leg could be how to deliver a wow. So that when somebody walks through the door, they go, wow. And then from that leg, I could put, what's a story that I can provide that supports delivering a wow? And so all of a sudden, if you visualize the PowerPoint, if I was putting a PowerPoint together, the first slide, the title slide would be the customer service part. The first slide that I put in, I'd put a summary of what the talk's going to be about. But then the next slide is going to be how to deliver a wow. And then the slide for that's going to be an experience, like a story about someone who delivered a wow. And then the next slide is going to be, now here's your takeaway, whatever that looks like. Like, here's how you can deliver a wow. So that's the first thing I would do. I started on paper as a spider, and then it can transfer over to a PowerPoint. The second part about if I was starting from scratch is I would think about what's my dip story. Now, Lisa Nichols calls this the valley. And Lisa and I both heard it from the media. And originally she used to say the dip, but she changed it and made it her own as the valley, which I think is good marketing because now she can brand it that way. But ultimately, here's what it is. The DIP method is basically saying in your story, where was the muddy middle, or we call it the messy middle? Like, where did things go downhill? Mm-hmm. You learn from it. And so not every story has to have this or every talk, but I think if you do have this, the audience is going to relate because they're going to say, oh, he's been where I've been. And so how I structure a DIP method, or how it's sort of structured, is the first part is establishing credibility. So you think of it, it's hard to do this on screen, but it goes like this and then back up. So it's like starts at the top, goes down the muddy middle, and then comes back up. And so when I'm working my talk, I would say, okay, what's going to establish credibility? So let's say I'm going to speak to a group of realtors. Then I might talk about being a President's Club member when I was 20 years old, because that's a sales achievement. Selling photocopiers is what I did. And so not easy. And the real estate agents, I know they'll respect that. So it could say, he's a multiple-time President's Club member, the youngest in the Canadian company's history, and he sold photocopiers door to door for 10 years. That's the established credibility, why you should listen to me. So then in a perfect world, I'll come out and say, thank you so much for that amazing bio. But I have to say, and I said this, by the way, at the first, if you remember, it wasn't always this way. Here's what it looked like. And then I'll talk about my first year in sales. I almost got fired every month. I had to sign an agreement called POP, produce or perish. And basically, if I didn't produce, I would be fired at any given time. And I was agreeing to that. And so I was terrible. Every month I was almost fired. They didn't give me business cards until I proved myself. I had to write my own name on business cards. That was the crap I went through in sales. Let me tell you what changed that. This is now me coming out of my dip. And I'll say I started learning about personality types. I realized I was trying to sell to everybody the same. But once I started learning about personality types, I realized if I could adjust to the person in front of me, then I'll have a better sales call. And what happened as a result is that's when I became the youngest President's Club member after for a year almost being fired. So now that I've shared that with you, I want to teach you how you can sell by personality types. That's an example of a full dip for sales. Now I could use the same dip for a personal story, like I was in a car accident. Here's what happened. Here's what brought me back out of it. And now I want to teach you based on that. And by the way, you don't even have to teach at the end if it's a motivational talk, but that's just to kind of show you establish credibility, which by the way, if you're at the event and you have an MC, you don't have to even worry about that. The idea is your bio that you sent in establishes the credibility. And then and the reason I like it wasn't always this way is that way the audience doesn't feel like you're trying to say, well, I've always been this successful. It takes the air out of the room and they go, I can relate to this person. They just said they struggled too. So if I was starting to talk from scratch, I would use those two things I just mentioned, the spider method to come up with ideas. And then I would usually probably start with the spider method. And then once I come up with the ideas, I would say, what are the dips now in this talk? And I might have multiple dips or I might have one dip, but what are the dips in this talk? And then how do I come out of this being able to teach based on from that perspective, like coming out of my dip? So hopefully that helps in terms of structuring a talk.
It does. Absolutely. I think there's a lot of folks, I mean, our main audience here, right? Speaking is great. Be paid to speak is great. But in the end, they've got a business that they're building, right? And so they're lead gen, all this kind of stuff. So having that dip, a little mini hero's journey kind of sort of thing going on at the beginning of the talk to really get people engaged, help create relatability, show that you didn't have it all figured out. And now what you're about to teach on, which is now going to, that part, what you're going to teach on is going to cause them to want to work with you, cause them to go get your download, do that next step in your funnel and your process. But now that part matters more because you did the dip in front. Like you weren't just this magical marketing guru from, infancy, that there was something ahead of time or like whatever your thing is, right? So yeah, that I think that's really helpful for folks. I think there's been probably a lot of light bulbs for people in even how to put that together. So I appreciate that.
Well, thank you. And I will say too, I don't want to leave it with people thinking that's just for a talk that you create for an event. I will say I use that for Facebook Lives. I use that for everything. I'll do a Facebook Live and I'm like, what's the dip in this? And it could be a 5-minute live and it could be like, as an example, I'm just thinking top of my head, but it could be being raised by a single mother. Whenever there was times whenever we didn't have money to buy food. And so it could be me starting with that story. Like, it could be me saying, I know a lot of you guys see me online posting all the time and you might think this guy's got it all together, but let me just share how it started. And then I might go into that, my mother and I struggled to even pay the bills and get food. And one of the things my mother did was this time a kid, and this is a true story, a kid took my jacket because he had the same jacket, but his was older and rattier and mine was brand new. My mother had worked 2 weeks overtime to get that jacket. Whenever I told her that he stole it, we need to go get it back. She said, you know what? He has a way worse home life than you. I'll figure out a way to work again and get you a new jacket. And so that could be me learning compassion and saying, because I learned that compassion, now here's what I want to talk to you about today. So what I'm getting at is you can use those two methods for a 1 minute. I used it for my 5-minute TED Talk. You can use it for a 1 minute talk, 1 minute story, or a 45-minute keynote, or a full day training.
Oh, I love that. And I think that is going to be applicable to every single person who is watching today or listening in, because they need to be creating content in whatever form in their business. And if you just add into your video content this dip format at the beginning, it's going to strike home better. People are going to better connect with you. They're going to pay attention. You get your hook in well set at the beginning of the content and you're able to move forward. So that was a massive gold nugget. I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, you're very welcome. So if you had one little last piece of advice that you want to leave with our audience, what would that be?
Okay, so this is a segue into and by the way, you might hear my kids. I mentioned to you earlier that off air that my office Wi-Fi was down, so I rushed home to do this. So now I get the benefit of kids in the background playing.
Yes, and we appreciate the authenticity. Mine are in the other room too, so we're good.
Well, and they're two young boys, so they're probably play fighting right now, like that type of thing. But having said that, I think the one thing I would share, and it's kind of a segue into a plug, but at the same time, yeah, it makes sense. So I said this, I think, off air, but I wrote a book, and it's in the pre-order stage now. As we talk right now, it's pre-order, but it's literally June 25th. It's out, so we're talking a couple of weeks. It'll be out into the world, and people are ordering at pre-order. The book's called The Enlightened Passenger. It doesn't relate to the DIP method. Well, it kind of does, but it doesn't relate to speaking and how to get paid to speak on stages and that. But this is the sort of plug for it is, at the end of the day, none of the stuff that I'm sharing matters unless you work on you first. And so as a content creator, are you working on you? And what I mean by that, when I say, are you working on you, is if you don't, I just did an interview today I was interviewing Brian Austin Green, who people might know from as David from 90210, and he was in anger management. Sharna, his wife, was on Dancing with the Stars, and Randy Spelling for 90210. And ultimately, I recognized when I was talking to them that they're doing the work now. Like, they're doing the work as actors. They're like into the world of mindfulness and all this stuff. And what I recognize is that if they don't do the work on themselves, like they have 5 kids, Brian and Sharna. If they don't do the self-care work for themselves, they're going to burn out. So what I'm getting at is, if you're a content creator, but you never take the time for yourself for self-care, and self-care could look like anything, a spa, sauna, it could be working on your home. That could be your meditation. I could be listening to Metallica and jamming out while you're lifting weights. But if you don't take some me time, in my experience, creating content is going to burn you out. So the reason I say, if I could share a message, I would say, in the book, I share 10 lessons for how do we bring more synchronicity into our life, so meaningful coincidences. I can't tell you how many bookings I've got because of synchronicities, meaning somebody said something and I leaned in versus saying, no, I'm going to go to the beach today. And so what I would say is, you need to focus on you, growing you. And the richer you are as a person, the better you're going to be at content creation. So whenever I, for example, mentioned, like, if I talked about this story about how I was raised by a single mother, well, I could also talk about a story about how I was doing yoga one day and somebody walked in and this happened. I have so many life stories because I take me time. I get adventurous in life, that because of that, I think it makes me a better creator because I have more stories to pull from. And I honestly think at the heart of all great content creation is story. And I think sometimes people, they're in at their computer, all they do is work, all they do is look at the computer, and it gets hard to think of what can I do that's a unique angle because you're not experiencing all the richness of life. So the way I say it was a plug is because if you grab The Enlightened Passenger, it will teach you how to get more of those things. It's a fictional parable as well, so it is a story. But even if you don't get that, the takeaway I'd want you to have is, you'll find ways to make time for yourself to fill up your cup before you fill up other people's cups. Because again, if you're trying to create, which is such a noble thing, you're trying to impact other people's lives. But if you're always doing it from an empty cup, I think that's what we get in terms of your creation. And the creators that I know that are always crushing it, they're constantly filling their cup. They're constantly, when you look at their stories, they're like, how could they live this much? But they are. They're experiencing life. And I think, like Gary Vaynerchuk, the guy never stops training, but if you look at his content creation, it's stuff that just happened to him that day as he was walking out in the street and somebody bumped into him. Or somebody said, hey, Gary, I bet you can't create this. And he's like, that's a challenge. I'm going to make this a challenge. But he's experiencing life, and he's, even though he talks about crushing it and always, what would you call it, grinding it out, he's still living a Gary V life, which allows him to create content from those stories. So I know this is a long tangent, but I do believe we need to make time for us, and we need to also be adventurous in life if we want to create great content.
No, I think that's wonderful. And I think that is a good reminder to all of those who are see my O's are even coming out stronger. My former Minnesotans coming out here. I can't talk to you too long. But for those who are, really in the launch phase, which does take a level of hustle or grind in getting their businesses up and running. But it is a gentle reminder to make sure that you bake in some of that stuff so that you can stay at it. You can stay creating. You can stay telling a good story. You can live enough life to actually, it's weird that you have to live life to tell a story to run the business. But, even if your priorities are a little, messed up or backwards, it's another reason to do what we should do anyway. So I think that's important.
Yeah. And I think to add on to that, for me, I've never been about, I used to think when I was younger it was about balance, but I've never been about balance. And what I mean by that is I mix it all the time because I love what I do. So we were just at a writer's retreat in Utah last week. I'm in the middle of a major book launch. We were at a writer's retreat and, my wife said, you did pretty good, in the sense that I was like on and off. So like we go to a show, like Awakening is a new show in Vegas. We went to watch the show Awakening. And then the next morning I'm up at 6 a.m. doing an interview for the book. But what I mean is that the Awakening and the book, it wasn't like, let's do one day of stuff and then stop and do one day of this. It was literally like, okay, I have an interview today. What can we do? Me and her traveling around the city before my interview. So I mix and match, and then I don't ever feel like it's too much because I'm not just working 18 hours a day. It's like in between work, I'm doing stuff for the family and stuff with us. And so I think early on, I did the opposite. I would just go 18 hours a day. And then I burned out twice. And I can tell you the hardest thing in my experience to ever come back from is a burnout. Like you don't realize it. People always say, if I burn out, I'll just do this. My experience is no, you won't. It's going to take you, you're going to have to put more time in to getting back. And the time in is doing nothing, which is hard if you're a creative. So my experience tells me better to never burn out and to burn out and try to fix it later. So just take time for you and be adventurous. And if you have to, set a timer and go outside and be adventurous for an hour and then come back and keep creating.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you so much. It's been an awesome conversation. If people want to check you out, where should they head?
So if they want to, again, the plug for the book, if they want to check out the book, and I didn't talk about it much, but if they want to get a feel for the book, which the best comparison, people have been comparing to like The Alchemist or the Celestine Prophecy or Augmendino's books. So it's that vein of book, again, a fictional parable. But if you want to learn more about it, just go to thisisthebook.com. Again, thisisthebook.com. And again, I should tell you, it won't teach you a whole lot about speaking or creating or anything like that, but it will teach you about what life's really about, the richness of life. So that's one side. If you heard the other side, you said, you were asked, Corey was asked earlier how to speak at Harvard and Columbia and Oxford, and we talked about Blue Talks. If you want to learn more about what that looks like, the shortcut right now, I won't do this forever, but the shortcut right now is my email, which is Corey, Corey, same as on the screen, at bluetalks.com. But now Blue is BLU. So it's Corey at BLUtalks with an S on the end.com. If you send me an email there, tell me you heard me on the show. You want to know more about what we do to help experts get featured, build their brand. I always say we help them become the instant expert because within 3 months, they could be speaking at MIT, have a thing says as seen on Apple, Roku, Amazon, Google Play, have a flyer showing they shared the virtual bill with Les Brown, and wrote a book with Joe Vitale. You can imagine in 4 months what that does for your credibility. So if you want to know how we do that and be a part of that, like I said, Corey at bluetalks.com. Those are kind of the two separate directions completely from each other. I do. So it relates more to the first, which is this is the book that I wrote, The Enlightened Passenger. The book before that is called The Book of Why and How. And I still think this is related and relatable to creators because it's about how to find your why. And then when you find it, what to do with it. And then how to sleep at night when you're doing it, meaning like how to do it in the right way. And so it's called The Book of Why and How. It's been out for a few years. And I'd like to give people the audio version of the book. So it's pretty easy. It's thebookofwhyaudio.com. Again, thebookofwhyaudio.com. If you go there, it's legit. It literally forwards you to the audiobook. Like you sign up and it forwards you. So it's not even Audible. You don't have to sign up for Audible or anything. You just start listening. It's actually through SoundCloud. So you can listen on any platform you want. But I'd like to give people that book. And it's a book that I still talk about all the time. So I really do believe you'll get a lot from it. And regardless of what else you do, my goal today has been to serve. So if you do nothing else but grab that free book, I'm still a happy person.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It's been a great conversation. You've been listening to the Digital Trailblazer podcast. For show notes and information about today's guest, head to digitaltrailblazer.com. Now, if you love this episode, if you got some value, make sure you leave us a review and subscribe. And be sure to share this episode with anyone you know who could use help to build their business. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.